And we are going to wrap up the day with Kenneth Neilson. Welcome, Mr. Neilson. And again, I know you've been present, so I'm not going to give you the summary, but I would ask you to please introduce yourself for the record. If it lights up red, then it's live.
Okay. My name's Ken Neilson. I'm from around the Hartland, New Brunswick area. My MLA is Stuart Fairgrave. And my story, I guess, begins with my oldest son. And when Kaylin was born, sorry. But when Kaylin was born, we were so excited as parents, and we wanted to do everything right and do everything that we possibly thought possible for this kid. And so we did the vaccine regimen and stuff like that. But when he was born, we noticed that there was a rash around his face. And we questioned the doctors about this rash, and we said, we want to know what this rash is. And the first response was, it's cradle cap, and it'll be gone in 7 days. So, you know, being the parents that we were, we said, okay, 7 days, that's not bad. So the rash didn't disappear in 7 days. But we continued the vaccine program because, we had faith in the doctors, we had faith in the system, and we continued the vaccine program. And in 2 months, we kept asking about this rash because it went from his cheeks up over his head, down over his back, covered his whole body, and then you swear to God he had measles or chicken pox or whatever it was. So we kept asking the doctors, we wanted to know what this was. We wanted an answer, as anybody would want an answer, right? So nobody was giving us an answer. So my wife and I sat down and said, okay, we're going to stop everything, right? So at the time, my wife had a really great doctor who supported us. We stopped vaccines, and she said, okay, no problem, we got no problem with that. We wanted to go to a dermatologist. She set it up for us to go to a dermatologist and actually squeezed us into a dermatologist in St. John. His only answer was steroid cream. And he gave us a tube of steroid cream, we put it on the baby, and the baby looked picture perfect. I mean, there was no rash, there was no, he was just glowing, he was just a picture perfect baby. But it didn't change the symptoms inside of him. I'm going to make a statement, maybe, but he never farted, okay? And I never understood what that meant at the time because, he burped a lot, right? But he never gave out gas like babies would give out gas and stuff like that. So we went on this year, going back to the doctor's office time after time, and we wanted an answer to what was going on because even though he was a picture-perfect baby, we knew there was something going on inside of him. And we wanted an answer to what was going on inside of him, right? And nobody had an answer. So my wife and I sat down one day and we said, well, we'll take him off steroids and see if this thing is cleared up, okay? So we took him off steroids, and I remember holding Kaylin. His head started sweating, and I was holding him like this, and we were getting ready to go to the ER because at the time, Roxanne, or my wife's family doctor, decided she wasn't going to do family practice anymore, and so the children and Roxanne ended up with no doctor. So we relied on the ER system. So I had the baby, and I was holding him, and his head was sweating. And I turned to comfort him, and his head smelled literally like rotting meat. It just smelled like rotting meat. And so we went to the ER, and I remember the doctor was there. After a long wait, we got in, we got talking to the doctor. And he was an Asian doctor, and we were just, we were expressing our concerns as parents. Like, I thought, that they would swab his head or they would do something, right? They would just try to find an answer to this situation. And, but they didn't, right? The doctor, he said to me, he goes, well, he said, maybe if you went home and washed his head in Neilson blue. And I looked at the doctor, and I said, if I came in here with my head smelling the way this kid's head's smelling, you would tell me to go home and wash my head in Neilson blue? And that doctor said the most amazing thing out of all the times that we've been going to the doctor and everything. He said to me, he said, Mr. Neilson, I have absolutely no idea what's going on with your kid. He said, I have absolutely no idea. And that's when my wife and I decided, okay, we got to try to find out ourselves what is going on with him. So my wife started looking into her family's history, my family's history, about what could go on. And she found that celiac disease ran in her family's side. So she decided we're going to strip this kid of everything that is gluten-free, that has gluten in it. And we're going to strip his diet right down. And she was breastfeeding at the time. So she was not just restricting the child, but she was restricting herself to see. And we slowly took him off this steroid cream and stuff. And amazingly, his rash started leaving his body. He started clearing up. And we found out that through controlling his diet and stuff, which we even today have a struggle with, but as long as we can control his diet, his body would remain normal. It wouldn't break out and stuff. So this put us on high alert to the fact, okay, if we got to control his diet, we got to control what goes into this kid, okay? And we have to control every aspect of whatever is going to go into him. So I remember when H1N1 broke out. And Stephen Harper was making this big deal about H1N1, and we were all getting on the fear factor. I got on the fear factor. I mean, like as a parent, you're thinking, well, gee, it's my mandate, personal mandate, my own conscience says I got to protect this child with my life. So I was the first one to go down and get the H1N1 vaccine. My wife got the H1N1 vaccine. But we stopped at the baby because we said, well, we know we got to control what goes into this child. We need to know what's in this vaccine. So we went and we called the nurses line. And we said to the nurses line, we say, listen, we need to know what's in this vaccine. Nobody's telling us anything. And the nurse line said, well, it's an egg-based vaccine. And she said, you have to test him for eggs. Has he been tested for eggs? I said, no, we didn't test him for eggs. We didn't know we had to. So we boiled up some eggs, and the nurse was still on the line, and Roxanne had the baby, and when the eggs were boiled, we took a little tiny piece of the white and put it into his mouth, and immediately, just like that, he turned as red as that chair. He was having a reaction to the eggs. Well, the nurse heard us in our panic. Roxanne was trying to dig the piece of egg out of the baby's mouth. And the nurse on the line was saying, what color is he? What color is he? What color is he? Is he choking? And after Roxanne got the piece out of his mouth and he calmed down, we said to the nurse, he said, he's okay, nothing's going, he's calming down and stuff like that. And the nurse, I can hear her voice right to this day, she said, by no way give him that vaccine. And it was at that point that we decided that we were not going to vaccine from fear anymore. And that's my stance. I said, I will not be feared into doing something simply because the masses think that that's the right thing to do. My obligation as a parent is to stand up for my children. I mean, if you look at my family, we send our sons over to the grandparents' house, and God bless the grandparents, I love them to pieces. But they grew up in a day, and I remember talking to my father-in-law, And you talk to them about, well, you got to watch his diet. You can't just feed him anything and stuff like this and that. You got to understand that he's got to be on this restricted diet, whether he likes it or not, and he'll tell you the biggest story to get the biggest piece of pie that he can ever get. But you got to be on this restricted diet. And so the grandparents' response is, well, I grew up in the day and it didn't bother me. I turned out perfect. Well, that's great. But you know, like if you walked into Sobeys 10 years ago and looked at how many gluten-free products was on there, because, you know, this has happened 10 years ago. And we were scratching around trying to find food to feed this baby because gluten-free products weren't available. But today, if you walk into Sobeys, you can see aisles of gluten-free because it's becoming a well-known thing. And our thing from this was that we were hoping that the medical society would look at this, that the doctors would look at this and say, well, hey, we can learn something from this case. We can learn something, right? So are we anti-vax? No. Do we scrutinize vaccines? Yes. And that's my job as a parent, is to look at you. If you force me, and you know, like when I heard about this Bill 39, you know, it put fear in my body, for my family, because I believed that you were stripping me of my right to say no. All this time that was going on with the Kayla and my oldest son, they were always, every time you go into the ER, are his vaccines updated? Is they up? And you know, you think, well, we're not here about our vaccines. We're about this child and getting an answer for him. And I remember one time, and I was out west, and I work out west till this day, right? And I remember I was out west, and Roxanne called me, and she's pretty upset because my oldest son went to the hospital. He had a breathing problem. Like it was just strep throat or something, I don't know what it was at the time, but had a breathing problem. And she went into the ER, talked to the doctor, and he said, well, is his vaccines up to date? And she said, no, we don't do the vaccine thing because we're very picky about what goes into his body and stuff. We need to know a lot of information about what it contains. We need to know all this information. And the young doctor, because the vaccine were not up, he didn't want to take the liability. So he sent my wife to Fredericton, which is an hour away. She gets into Fredericton 2 o'clock in the morning with this son. She has to make arrangements with the grandparents to watch the other son. So they're there 6 hours for the doctor to come on the day shift. The doctor comes in, looks at him, and says, well, you can go home now. Just simply because we're not vaccinated. And it's not the fact that we're carrying a plague or anything. It's simply that we're cautious parents. We put the onus, you know, like I tell doctors all the time, it's not my right, not my place to tell you the vaccines are not good. But it's not your place to tell me without proof that you're not going to harm my child. And I want to know without a shadow of a doubt that you will not harm my child. Saying all that, this is how I assess all the situations. I'm not a doctor, I'm just a concerned parent, and my wife can tell you I analyze things right to death. But you see, that's my training. I work out west, they have problems. My job is to go in, analyze the problem, write up a report of what that problem is and the best situation to correct it. It may be in a mechanical aspect, but that's my training. And I'll show you when an example of that. My oldest son went into swimming this year. Been in the swimming pool all of his life, in a chlorine pool. All of his life, even as a baby. I love swimming. He's there with me. And we went swimming as much as we could. So he decided he was going to join the swim team this year, and I was very proud of him, you know, because this is the first athletic event he wanted to go into. So he got in it, and he's swimming with the swim teams. He's doing really good. And the swim teams decides that they're going to buy these swim caps to represent the team. He's really excited about this here swim cap and everything, right? He slaps it right on out of the package, gets in, practices with the team, takes it off. He's getting in the car to go home. Bam, just like that, he has an allergic reaction. I mean, he's ripping his shirt off. He's just as red, looks like he's got another t-shirt underneath because he's breaking out in these hives, and he's having this allergic reaction. Well, we're trying to calm him down because, he's scratching his body, he's saying, I'm burning up. So we get him home, and we have a process because, we've been drilled as parents to deal with these situations because we don't know when they're going to happen. So we get him home. My wife decides we're going to get him an antihistamine, I think it is, to calm it down and everything like that. So she gets him one of them. But, before we give it to him, you know what the thought that goes through our heads? We look at each other. Is there anything in this antihistamine that's going to create another reaction? That's the thought that goes through our heads. But, he's in this situation, so we give it to him. And immediately after we give it to him, we take him to the ER. And we want the doctor to look at him. We want the doctor to make sure that everything's okay with him. We explain everything. We take the bottle of Benadryl with us and say, this is what we gave him. Is there anything? And the doctor reassures us and says, well, no, that's what they would have prescribed. So that's our situation with him, right? But the thing that has to happen after that, we as parents has to find out what triggered the reaction. We need to know because we need to inform the doctors, the ER, and that of what triggered it. So with my detective skills, I tell my wife, I said, well, it's either the bathing cap did it or it's the powder on the bathing cap that triggered the reaction. So we have to do an experiment to separate the two to find out what the reaction is. And we came to the conclusion that it was the reaction to talcum powder. So we have to make sure all the doctors and everything understand that you cannot pull gloves out of the box and start handling our son because he's allergic to talcum powder. And we're very, very effective in letting everybody know about our child. So to say all this here, I feel that Bill 39 would restrict our rights as parents because through our experience, they're so dependent upon vaccines. They're so dependent on processing in our own experience of just saying, okay. And the reason I say that is because I remember when our youngest son, he had this really bad cough. And there's warnings that whooping cough were going around at the time and stuff like that there. And he had this really bad cough. So my wife took him in 4 times. 4 times he went to the ER. 4 times they sent him home and said, well, it's just a viral infection. And just gave him something to calm down the throat and stuff like that. But the 4th time, the receptionist that was out there working triage was a secretary for my wife's doctor. And she recognized the cough. And she said to my wife, she said, we're going to get you into the doctor in the morning and make it a priority. Just come down first thing in the morning. So we sent him down, and they took a swab of his throat and found out he had whooping cough. I got whooping cough from him. And the thing that was amazing about the whooping cough, my wife was breastfeeding him at the time, and she never got whooping cough. My oldest son, who played with him day in and day out, excuse me, never got a whooping cough. I was working out in Fort Mac, and when my wife called me, I said, okay, I better go down and report this at the hospital and tell them, I thought I was going to go into the hospital. I thought they were going to quarantine me, quarantine the house that I was staying at and everything. The doctor said, well, no, just make sure you make limited contact with people. Tell everybody in your house to come down, and they're going to prescribe something for them that they could pick up at the pharmacy. And that was the whole thing. And I literally thought that I was going to be quarantined. So, that's when I decided that I'm not going to fear more anymore. Now, I brought this magazine with me because in the magazine, there's a really good article. And the article is about this woman who was vaccinated for whooping cough. Now, you got to understand, I was vaccinated for whooping cough too. 3 years prior to getting whooping cough. Okay? Yeah, no, okay, I'll shut it down here quick. But she was vaccinated for whooping cough, got whooping cough, and I read the article because I really wanted to compare what she went through and what I went through. So the symptoms and everything were great. But you know, what I deduced out of this article was the simple fact. Just because you're vaccinated, don't mean you're not going to get it. And you know, and they quarantined this woman here, and I wanted a source that was outside of my own personal thing because I didn't want you to think I was fabricating the stories, right? But they quarantined her because they were afraid that, you know, other people were going to get whooping cough and all this and that. So I don't belong to any vaccine group or anything like that, and I'll tell you the God's honest truth. This is the very first time that my wife and I have ever spoken publicly about this. Her family is very pro-vaccine. They believe in vaccines, and we were too. We don't talk about it. We share nothing about it because it's not our right to influence other people's decisions. It's their right to choose what is right for their family. And all we can do is respect that. And that's what this is all about. It's not a religious exemption. It's nothing. But I'll leave you with this thought. I have a doctor, a family doctor. My wife does not have a family doctor. My children do not have a family doctor. Who's going to write the medical exemption? You can take your case to the doctors, and we've talked to doctors before. Their thing is well, you don't vaccine, and we really don't know you. We have no history with you. Now, I don't fault my doctor for not taking my family on because, you know, her excuse was, or her reasoning was, is that she didn't want to take on any more patients. And I know how busy doctors can be. And I think before we start trying to remedy one situation like creating all these vaccines, we should step back and look at the system itself and say, well, maybe we should look at the system and make sure it's ready for these changes we're trying to implement. Are we feeding? You know, my doctor, I went in, I see her every 2 years. And she laughs when she comes, she'll say, Ken, well, it's been 2 years since I last seen you. I'm a very healthy person. I've never taken a flu shot in my life outside the H1N1. I've never missed a day of work, they tell you. I've never missed a day of work. My kids are really quick to bounce back from any sickness or anything. They never, ever get earaches or anything like that. They're very healthy kids, and we maintain this. So my point is that I go in to see my doctor every 2 years. And she said to me, she said, Ken, it's been 2009 since you had your booster. I'll give you your booster right now. I sat there and thought, well, gee, you know, because I went through all this with my son. You know what the thought that went through my head? I said, one, she did not tell me what the ingredients were in the vaccine. Two, she did not explain to me the side effects of the vaccine that she was going to apply to me. And three, there's no law that covers that she has to. And you know, and I'm thinking that, you know, if you talk about informed consent, you know, I'm hoping I'm not going too over. But you know, you want to research something, you want to read this here. It's called the $1 million drug. It's one of the greatest Canadian inventions or discoveries. It's called gene therapy. This drug applied once to people, and they're basing it on Chicoutimi, Quebec. This drug applied once would utterly change a person's life. It would cure the defective gene in the person's body. Pharmaceutical bought the rights to it, started manufacturing it, but they found out it was an only one-time application. It was an only one-time application. So they figured out what they should make out of this here drug for a profit, and they came up with a number that was like $1.4 million for a person to get this shot. You know, when I watched this here, and I was reading the different things that the president of this company said, you know, like he justified because of the shareholders and stuff like that. But I encourage you to really watch this. This is put on by the CBC, and I mean, it's called the $1 Million Drug, and it really gives you an insight. You know, and the guy makes really, you know, the drug industry is accustomed to failure. Only a fraction of the drugs in development ever make it to market, and this is what the CEO is saying, right? But unlike most experimental compounds that end up being too toxic or ineffective, this drug really works. It really works, and that's what he said. And the thing is, he goes on to say, in a perfect world, we would be putting this drug on market. I do not see politicians breaking the door down to this here pharmaceutical company trying to say, hey, it's inhumane for you to be able to hold this drug back. I don't see doctors signing petitions. I don't see pharmaceutical companies going, or the pharmacists going after these guys and say, hey, you know, you should be putting this on market. And I'll tell you, if I was one of the families in Quebec that was affected by this disease, or gene, a lack of a gene, I would really be furious to know that there's a cure and not get it. I mean, there's 31 cases that they've done clinical trials on, and 31 they had successes with. And I encourage you just to sit down some night, look up the CBC, and look and Google the $1 Million Drug. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Very much. We do have time for questions, and I can see one coming right over here. Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
Coming right up. Thank you very much for sharing your story, and we can tell it was difficult, and you said it's the first time you're telling this, and appreciate it very much. And taking the time to come here to add to the discussion for this bill. I just wanted to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I heard you say you got whooping cough 3 years after you were vaccinated for it.
Yes.
Your likely immunocompromised oldest son did not get it when you had it.
Yes.
And your other son had it.
Yes, the baby had it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is your biggest problem with Bill C-39 the lack of confidence you have in the broader medical system?
No, I think the lack of, my greatest fear of Bill 39 is to take the rights away from the parent to say no.
For the individual, yeah.
Yeah, like we should be able to say, no, we don't feel this is good for her. Like, I mean, if you're going to, okay, to give you another thing, this is what I do, okay? Down in the state, they got this virus going around called Triple E. I don't know if you ever heard of it or anything like that. It's a really big outbreak in Massachusetts. Now, 4 people have already died from Triple E, okay? There's no known cure for Triple E. But I was watching the program, and this year's a chief medical officer for the hospital of Boston. And they asked him, said, who's at risk the most? And his response stunned me. His response was, the ones with a compromised immune system are at risk most. Ones that are at compromised immune system. That's why it's so important to me as a parent, right? But you know, like he went on to how, they asked him how to take measures to keep away from getting this here, Triple E here, and what you should do, and to, you know. And so I told my wife, like, when I hear something like this, and I mean, Massachusetts is next door, wind blows north, most storms come north, and I'm quite sure mosquitoes are going to come with these, whether hitchhiking on a bird or what. So me is like, take measures right now to prepare for what likely could happen. And if it doesn't happen, that's okay. At least I know what to expect. Vaccines, I don't know what to expect.
So again, it's the unknown with the vaccine, but it's also the fact that there are non-vaccinated illnesses that can still affect the immunocompromised. It's those two.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'll pass on for someone else.
Megan? Oh, Ms. Minton?
Madam Chair, thank you for your time today. I wanted to ask you a question in relation to your concerns about Bill 39. So from what you've said, it sounds like you're opposed to this legislation, this proposed legislation, and I guess I wanted to ask about your specific concerns. From what I'm hearing, I wonder if your son would be covered under the medical exemptions. So I'm wondering if you can speak to where your concerns are coming from and whether you agree with that. That would be my interpretation.
Okay, so if my son's going to be covered under the medical exemptions, who's going to give him that medical exemption? They don't have a doctor.
So, and I would agree, there's a lack of primary care practitioners and people being able to access them. So your concern would partially be around access to healthcare resources.
Yes.
Okay.
You know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I got to ask you, what do you do when you go out west? What is your line of work?
What is my line of work?
Yeah.
I work for the United Rentals out west, and I'm a service tech on site.
United what?
United Rentals,
Okay.
all right? We put out support equipment for the sites up there, right? So
Generators and that's, generators in the lake?
What's that?
Generators in the lake, that sort of thing?
It starts out generators and that, but we actually put out support equipment like for running villages and stuff like that there, and we have to go out. And a lot of times, a lot of equipment, you have to diagnose a lot of the things, and especially if they have a complex compound, you have to go in and look at all the compounds that they're running, like computer systems and stuff like that there, to come up with the best possible system that would work with them. A lot of times, like, you know, we sit down with the sync crew and all them there, and we all have to hash it over. In my position, like, there's times when I would override Syncrude or their people because I understand our equipment and they might have to rewire their compound and stuff like that there, but, you know.
I worked out there as well. The reason I ask is because you seem to be very astute at problem solving.
That's my job.
That's why I brought it up.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I too want to reiterate the sentiments of my colleagues. I very much appreciate you being here today. I appreciate the personal stories that you're giving and the travel. And I do think it's incredibly important that we have the public engaged in these conversations. So thank you again. Before everyone leaves, I would like to have the opportunity just to speak with the committee. And as such, I can end today's proceedings. And we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.